We're looking for Carline Augustin. We have reason to believe she's employed at this school.
I don't care what reason you have. You're not approaching any of my teachers without a judicial warrant and proper clearance.
We're federal agents. We don't need your permission.
Actually, you do. This is a school. We have student privacy laws, employee protections, and protocols.
The confrontation erupted at 2:45 p.m. on a cool fall afternoon in Lincoln High School's science corridor in Minneapolis. What began as 3 masked ICE operatives demanding to question a chemistry instructor would spiral into an entire corridor of teachers, creating a physical wall to shield their co-worker. A remarkable clash recorded on the school's security system that would spread across the internet within hours, and a federal case that would eventually grant Carline Augustin $11.7 million while revealing the perilous crossroads where immigration enforcement meets education. If you're pumped to watch institutional racism get dismantled, smash that like button and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. And if this is your first visit here, hit subscribe immediately, because tomorrow's episode about law enforcement picking the wrong targets and paying the price is one you can't afford to miss. Let me know down in the comments if this story resonated with you. Carline Augustin was 34 years old, a chemistry instructor who'd been teaching at Lincoln High for 6 years. She was Haitian-American, born in Port-au-Prince, but brought to America as a 5-year-old when her family escaped political turmoil and bloodshed. She'd grown up in Brooklyn, went through public schools, funded her college education through scholarships while juggling multiple jobs, and established a teaching career, working with students who mirrored her own journey. Dismissed, doubted, desperate for someone to have faith in them. She excelled at what she did. The type of instructor students would specifically ask for in advanced placement classes, the type who could break down complicated reactions in ways that suddenly made sense. The type who remained after hours to tutor struggling juniors for their tests and never made them feel embarrassed for needing help. Her curriculum planning was creative. Her laboratory sessions were legendary in the department. Her former students, the ones who made it to college, spoke her name with reverence. Yet her evaluation reports praised her in private but vanished from public recognition. Her peers admired her abilities, but her breakthroughs went uncelebrated during faculty gatherings. Her proposals for modernized lab supplies were consistently rejected. She'd been overlooked for department leadership twice, always with explanations that seemed nebulous, always losing out to instructors with shorter tenure and inferior outcomes. She'd become a United States citizen through naturalization when she turned 18. She possessed the certificate as proof, stored securely at home alongside her other vital records. She owned a U.S. passport. She participated in every election. She contributed taxes. She'd even participated on a school safety board the year before, something requiring background verification. She was as American as anyone native-born, with paperwork to back it up. That fall afternoon, Carline was running her daily shift in her chemistry laboratory, a well-lit, efficiently arranged space on Lincoln High's second floor with views of the football field. She was walking 16 juniors through a titration exercise, a precise process demanding accuracy and concentration. The students hunched over their beakers, pipettes gripped carefully, observing the liquid shift color one drop at a time. Carline circulated among the lab stations, fine-tuning burettes, fixing technique, her tone steady and supportive, all while enforcing rigorous safety standards. The assignment was painstaking, systematic, the kind of instruction requiring unwavering attention and instant corrections. A single error could destroy the whole experiment. Carline stood at a student's workstation showing correct swirling motion and quietly coaching a girl who'd been having trouble with the molarity calculations. She believed in reaching students at their actual level, not where the curriculum assumed they should be. That's when the hall monitor, an anxious sophomore named Travis, showed up at the lab entrance wearing an expression Carline had never witnessed on his face, a blend of fear and bewilderment. 3 men in tactical gear and dark masks had walked into the science corridor moments before, their footsteps echoing on the waxed floors, their arrival jarring against the background noise of afternoon lessons. They carried themselves with the sort of command that doesn't request permission, doesn't pause for pleasantries. They insisted on seeing Carline Augustin by name, brandishing an administrative warrant at Travis with the assumption of instant obedience. The kid stuttered, gestured toward the chemistry lab, and the operatives pushed past him without further acknowledgement. Inside the laboratory, Carline stopped mid-sentence. Her students glanced up from their work, puzzlement spreading through the space. The agents materialized in the doorway, silhouetted by fluorescent lighting, their vests marked with letters that made Caroline's heart sink. ICE Immigration and Customs Enforcement. One operative advanced, palm raised as though to quiet the room before anyone could react. The school's guidelines for law enforcement interactions were explicit. All outside authorities needed to register with administration, coordinate through the principal's office, and respect student privacy rules. These operatives had ignored all of that. They'd circumvented the front entrance, skipped the visitor registration, and marched directly into an active classroom as though regulations meant nothing to them. Their explanation, stated in terse, inflexible language, was an anonymous report. Someone had flagged Carline Augustin as undocumented, as someone who had no right to be there. A handful of scattered faculty in the corridor spotted the disturbance and approached the lab, voices lifting in inquiry. A history instructor requested the agents hold on. A math teacher positioned herself in front of one operative, obstructing his route. The friction was instant, tangible. These were educators conditioned to defend their students, their environment, their colleagues. The agents pushed through them, claiming they had authorization to interrogate Caroline's immigration standing, to hold her if needed, to take her into custody if she couldn't present citizenship proof immediately. Principal David Reynolds stepped out of his office at the corridor's opposite end, pulled by the elevated voices and the abrupt chaos. He was a man in his 50s, composed in bearing but firm in conviction, the sort of administrator who believed regulations existed to safeguard people, not to be manipulated for expediency. He moved purposefully toward the chemistry lab, planting himself decisively between the operatives and the entrance. His words, when he delivered them, were controlled but final. He insisted on a judicial warrant. He referenced student safety statutes. He invoked staff privacy safeguards. He clarified that without legitimate authorization, the operatives wouldn't advance another inch. The agents called for reinforcements on their radios. They issued threats about obstruction violations. They maintained their administrative warrant was adequate. Reynolds remained motionless. He contacted school security. He reached out to the district's legal representatives. He stood in the entrance, arms folded, his frame a blockade the operatives couldn't lawfully breach without resorting to physical confrontation. Additional teachers assembled, summoned from neighboring classrooms by the commotion. A dozen educators appeared in the hallway. Math instructors, English professors, the school librarian, the assistant principal. They created a loose semicircle around the lab door, their bodies subtly repositioning to obstruct entry without hostility. It wasn't coordinated. It wasn't practiced. It was instinct, shared instinct, to defend one of their own. Inside the laboratory, Carline positioned herself behind her peers, her pulse racing, her fingers shaking faintly as she clutched the rim of a lab counter. She recalled her naturalization ceremony at 18, the satisfaction she'd experienced raising her right hand, reciting the pledge. She thought of her U.S. passport resting in a drawer at home, worthless to her at this moment. She thought of her students, still motionless at their lab stations, witnessing this scene. She spoke nothing. She declined to participate without legal representation. It was her only leverage in that instant. Silence, composure, the quiet determination she'd constructed over years of being underappreciated and disregarded. The security cameras in the corridor documented everything in crystal-clear resolution. The operatives' tactical equipment, the educator's resolute semicircle, Reynolds's unwavering position in the doorway, the deadlock extended into minutes. Students peered from classrooms, murmuring, recording on smartphones. The climate was turbulent yet controlled, a confrontation developing in the moment with no apparent solution. Caroline's thoughts drifted involuntarily to her entrance into the United States at age 5. She remembered the chaos of Port-au-Prince, the evening her family ran, the loss of relatives she'd never encounter again. She remembered her mother laboring at 3 jobs to maintain housing. She remembered scholarships and midnight study marathons and the isolating struggle of financing her own college while her classmates partied and networked. She remembered starting at Lincoln High, enthusiastic to teach, only to discover her approaches questioned, her innovations rejected, her contributions silenced in gatherings where mediocrity received praise over brilliance. The human barricade strengthened. Teachers traded looks, wordless understanding flowing among them. Reynolds pressed his authority, restating the school's private property status, the requirement for adequate confirmation, the legal mandates the operatives were blatantly disregarding. He refused to permit them forward. The operatives tried to maneuver around the group, to navigate past the semicircle. The teachers adjusted, tightening formation. Nobody lifted a hand. Nobody elevated their voice. They simply stood, immovable, representing a cross-racial alliance that required no explanation. The standoff was reaching its 15th minute when the operatives' radios crackled with incoming communication. Backup was postponed. Legal representation was approaching. The circumstances were being evaluated. The operatives' annoyance was apparent now, their posture transforming from assurance to aggravation. They delivered warnings. They threatened repercussions. But they didn't advance. They couldn't, not without risking assault accusations against a dozen educators, not without generating a spectacle that would be indefensible. Carline stayed behind the barrier of her colleagues, quiet and rattled, her inner fortitude starting to emerge. She had weathered worse than this. She had survived years of being undervalued, ignored, bypassed. She had concealed secrets deeper than anyone realized. And now, encircled by people willing to jeopardize their livelihoods to shield her, she felt something transform within. A determination, a lucidity. If they intended to pursue her, they would need to go through everyone. School security showed up at the 2:58 mark, 3 officers in Navy uniforms approaching carefully into the corridor, evaluating the scene with professional detachment. They'd been informed by Reynolds via phone. Federal operatives, no judicial warrant, disruption underway. The security squad positioned themselves between the educators and the ICE operatives, not as enforcers, but as intermediaries. Their arrival, a signal that the circumstances were being handled through legitimate channels. The head security officer, a former police investigator named Marcus Webb, spoke briefly with Reynolds, then addressed the agents with a composed directive. Any measures concerning school staff would require coordination through administration. The school's legal division was arriving. Until that time, the operatives were requested to wait in the main office or exit the property. The masked figures didn't react immediately. They remained in the corridor, radios hissing with interference, their irritation now evident in how they redistributed their weight, tugged at their vests, exchanged looks behind their masks. The impasse lasted 25 minutes altogether, a strained confrontation that seemed longer than its duration, every moment captured by the corridor cameras in sharp, irrefutable detail. The operatives couldn't force through without risking assault on educators. They couldn't lawfully hold Carline without proper confirmation and permission. They were outplayed, constrained by the very guidelines they had tried to circumvent. District officials showed up at 3:12. 2 attorneys from the district's legal division, informed and pressing, examined the administrative warrant the operatives had displayed. They determined it inadequate for detaining a staff member mid-shift, stressing due process, the interference with student education, the absence of reasonable suspicion. The operatives objected, referencing anonymous reports and database correlations, but the attorneys were unmoved. Without a judicial warrant authorized by a judge, without collaboration with school leadership, the operatives possessed no power to continue. The attorneys stated plainly, exit now, or face legal consequences for trespassing and disruption of educational functions. The operatives withdrew at 3:18, marching out of the science corridor with rigid, controlled movements, their departing remarks a caution that the situation wasn't finished, that Carline Augustin would be approached again, that refusal to comply would bring consequences. Reynolds observed them leave, his face unreadable, his frame still positioned defensively in front of the lab entrance until the operatives vanished down the staircase. The aftermath was swift and charged. Faculty members released their breath collectively, the pressure snapping like a severed cable. Teachers embraced Carline, commended her restraint, comforted her with statements that felt simultaneously reassuring and bizarre. She was trembling now, the adrenaline receding, replaced by disorientation and shock. Reynolds guided her gently into his office, shutting the door behind them, guaranteeing her the school's complete backing. The district would supply legal representation. Human resources would record everything. She wouldn't confront this isolated. But the question persisted, substantial and unanswerable in the moment. Why had ICE singled her out? She was a citizen. She possessed documentation. Her employment files were transparent. What anonymous report could possibly warrant this intrusion? The school secured an immigration lawyer that same night, a specialist in wrongful arrest situations named Rebecca Tran. Carline consulted with her in a borrowed meeting space, still in her lab coat, still mentally replaying the confrontation. Tran operated efficiently, accessing federal databases, demanding information on the tip that had initiated the visit. What she discovered was both foreseeable and crushing. An anonymous source had identified Carline Augustin as undocumented. ICE had processed the name through their network and located a match, a decade-old removal order for someone named Carline Augustin, deported to Haiti in 2013. But the match was incorrect. Catastrophically, carelessly incorrect. The removal order wasn't for Carline. It was for her identical twin sister, separated during their frantic departure from Haiti when they were children, believed lost in the bureaucracy. Deported under an incorrect identity years before, when she'd been detained during a sweep in Florida. Carline had never discussed her sister. The anguish was too profound, too entangled with remorse and sorrow. Her family had splintered in the crossing. Her twin had landed in foster placement under a different name, then disappeared through gaps Carline couldn't bridge. She'd suppressed the secret, concentrated on surviving, on constructing a life her sister never experienced. The discovery struck Carline like a physical impact. Her sister, after all this time. The database correlation had retrieved her sister's file, superimposed it onto Caroline's existence, and dispatched armed operatives to her classroom without a single supplementary check. No comparison of birth dates, no verification of social security numbers, no assessment of employment documentation, just a name correlation and a presumption of guilt. Tran outlined the ramifications meticulously. This wasn't simply carelessness, it was a pattern. ICE had a recorded history of depending on defective databases, obsolete information, racial targeting. Caroline's situation was severe, but not singular. The attorney suggested initiating a federal lawsuit. Fourth Amendment breaches for illegal seizure attempts, Fifth Amendment breaches for due process denial, 14th Amendment breaches for ethnic profiling. The twin sister revelation added emotional dimension to the accusations, converting a bureaucratic mistake into a human catastrophe. The security recording leaked that evening. A teacher who'd been in the corridor, still unsettled by the encounter, uploaded a 30-second segment to social media with a caption reading, "Teachers form human shield against masked ICE agents trying to detain a colleague. This is what solidarity looks like." The clip spread virally within hours. By sunrise, it had circulated through educator communities, immigrant advocacy organizations, news platforms. The footage was raw and unmistakable. Reynolds standing resolute in the doorway. Teachers creating a defensive semicircle. Agents radioing for support, students observing from classrooms. Headlines materialized by dawn. Teachers block ICE raid in Minneapolis high school. Educators form human barrier to protect Haitian-American colleague. Viral video shows school staff defying federal agents. The story propagated with the velocity and force of wildfire, magnified by the visual impact of the footage, the accessibility of the setting, the emotional resonance of teachers defending one of their own. Public outcry expanded exponentially. News organizations dissected the footage frame by frame, applauding the staff unity, honoring Reynolds' leadership as an illustration of cross-racial solidarity. Immigration lawyers and civil rights groups released declarations condemning ICE carelessness, highlighting the failure to confirm basic identifiers, the dependence on anonymous reports, the targeting of a naturalized citizen in her workplace. Educators countrywide contributed their own accounts of comparable overreach, generating a groundswell of support for Carline and a wider critique of enforcement methods that treated schools like raid locations. The narrative quietly presented a question to the expanding audience. Have you ever considered whether schools should be protected zones from such invasions? The comment sections overflowed with answers. Yes, definitely. Teachers deserve protection. This is why solidarity matters. Schools should be off limits. The interaction was genuine, fervent, a demonstration of how profoundly the story connected across demographics and political perspectives. Carline, viewing the footage for the first time on her laptop at home, felt something shift. The degradation of the standoff, the horror of being targeted, the grief of her sister's story, all of it converted into determination. She wasn't just advocating for herself anymore. She was advocating for her twin, for the teachers who'd stood with her, for every educator and student who deserved to feel secure in their classrooms. She authorized Tran to file the lawsuit. Federal court, ICE and the Department of Homeland Security identified as defendants. Constitutional breaches, emotional harm, punitive damages. Discovery commenced within weeks, and what it exposed was incriminating. Internal communications revealed operatives had advanced on a name match exclusively, bypassing protocols requiring multi-point confirmation. Agents confessed in depositions that they lacked field confirmation instruments, that they depended on outdated databases, that they'd never examined Caroline's employment records or her citizenship documentation before entering the school. Supervisors recognized systemic breakdowns but asserted good faith based on insufficient information. The defense was fragile, defensive, contradicted by the evidence at every juncture. Carline resumed teaching while the lawsuit progressed. Her overlooked excellence was suddenly apparent, honored. Colleagues requested her perspective on curriculum. Students arranged a solidarity demonstration. The school board released a formal acknowledgement for the trauma she'd experienced. But the recognition, while affirming, felt complicated. It had required a viral clip and a federal lawsuit for her contributions to be recognized, for her voice to carry weight. The unfairness of that wasn't lost on her. The chapter concluded on ascending momentum. The lawsuit was advancing toward trial. The footage persisted in circulation, a symbol of resistance and institutional breakdown. Carline stood in her vacant lab one evening after classes, staring at the titration apparatus still arranged from that afternoon, and felt the magnitude of what was approaching. Justice as technique, not theater. Truth as persistence, not exhibition. She would pursue this however long it required. The lawsuit developed over 7 months, progressing toward a 5-week trial that commenced in federal court on a frigid morning in late spring. The courtroom was crowded journalists, educators, immigrant rights supporters, former students. The viral security footage had transformed Caroline's case into a symbol of something greater, but the trial itself was systematic, procedural, grounded in constitutional law and bureaucratic breakdown. The evidence was condemning from the beginning. The prosecution presented the security footage completely, every frame recording the operative's hostility, the teacher's steadfast barrier, Reynolds's composed refusal to surrender. Agent depositions were entered into the record. Confessions of carelessness rendered stark in legal terminology. One operative admitted advancing on a name match exclusively. Another recognized they'd never confirmed Caroline's social security number or employment documentation. A third acknowledged that field confirmation instruments existed but weren't utilized because of time pressures and resource constraints. Testimonies accumulated, each one strengthening the case for systemic breakdown. Teachers recounted their instantaneous choice to defend Carline, the impulse to unite against overreach. They described her remarkable teaching, her inventive labs, her commitment to students who struggled. They detailed how she'd been disregarded for years, refused department leadership roles, silenced in gatherings, bypassed for resources despite evaluation reports that consistently ranked her among the top educators in the district. The portrait that materialized was of a woman who'd succeeded in obscurity, whose excellence had been devalued until a crisis thrust it into view. Carline testified on the 8th day of trial. She spoke plainly, without dramatics, recounting the terror of the standoff, the bewilderment of being targeted despite her citizenship, the turmoil of armed operatives interrupting her classroom. She described her naturalization at 18, the pride she'd experienced, the life she'd constructed. Then she disclosed the bombshell that transformed the case from bureaucratic mistake to human tragedy. Her identical twin sister, separated during their flight from Haiti, deported years before under an incorrect identity, the secret she'd carried silently for decades. The database correlation that had dispatched operatives to her door was to her sister, a woman she'd lost and grieved and never stopped contemplating. The courtroom was hushed. Jurors shifted forward. Journalists recorded notes. The emotional gravity of the disclosure was palpable, emphasizing the human price of careless enforcement of systems that processed people as data rather than lives. Expert witnesses testified on constitutional mandates for reasonable suspicion, the requirement of multi-point confirmation, the intimidating impact of immigration operations in schools. A former ICE supervisor, now a critic of the organization, explained how systemic breakdowns were facilitated by budget reductions, obsolete technology, and a culture that valued speed over precision. Students from Caroline's class, now seniors, described how the incident had interfered with their education but also instructed them about confronting injustice, about the strength of unified action. The defense contended good faith based on insufficient information, asserting operatives had adhered to available protocols, that the anonymous report had been credible enough to justify investigation. But the evidence overwhelmed their assertions. School employment documentation confirming Caroline's citizenship had been obtainable with a single phone conversation. Her social security number, distinct from her sister's, would have instantly identified the database mistake. The operatives had dismissed every available protection, advancing with recklessness that approached malice. Jury deliberation consumed 2 days. When the verdict arrived, it was definitive. Liability on all accusations, Fourth Amendment breaches, Fifth Amendment breaches, 14th Amendment breaches. The compensatory damages were established at $3 million for emotional harm, career consequences, and trauma. The punitive damages were established at $8.7 million, structured to discourage future carelessness, to communicate that constitutional protections couldn't be violated in the name of convenience. $11.7 million altogether, one of the largest settlements in comparable cases. The verdict generated headlines instantly. Teacher wins nearly $12 million in ICE raid lawsuit. Jury awards millions after viral school standoff. Federal court rules against ICE in wrongful detention case. 44597s. The aftermath was rapid and public. 3 operatives were fired. 2 supervisors were demoted. ICE announced policy modifications requiring multiple identity confirmations before any school-based enforcement operations. The modifications were substantial, propelled by the visibility of Caroline's case, the undeniable evidence of breakdown. Schools nationwide incorporated the incident as a case analysis in managing enforcement, a blueprint for defending staff and students. Lincoln High erected a plaque in the science corridor, brass lettering on polished wood. Here we stand united, protecting our own. It was installed near the chemistry lab, a lasting reminder of what had occurred, what had been risked, what had been achieved. Carline allocated part of the settlement to create a legal defense fund for educators confronting comparable threats. She collaborated with organizations specializing in immigration law and civil rights, financing training workshops on employee protections, enforcement guidelines, how to handle raids. The fund expanded rapidly, sustained by contributions from educators nationwide, from people who'd watched the viral footage and felt motivated to contribute. She maintained her career at Lincoln High. Her classroom was filled every semester, students requesting her sections. Her standing no longer underestimated or dismissed. Colleagues pursued her guidance. Administrators consulted her on curriculum. The acknowledgement was validating, but it didn't eliminate the years of disregard, the microaggressions, the quiet degradations. She carried both the victory and the wounds. Months following the verdict, Carline was invited to address a national education conference in Chicago. She stood on a platform before 2,000 educators, the viral footage displaying on screens behind her, and discussed what the event had uncovered. Not just systemic breakdowns in immigration enforcement, but the strength of solidarity, the necessity of standing together, the quiet fortitude that surfaces when people are finally recognized. She spoke about her sister, about the anguish of secrets maintained in silence, about how justice isn't just legal resolutions but the slow, challenging labor of making systems answerable. The story concluded with schools across the nation referencing Lincoln High as a blueprint, with ICE facing persistent examination, with reforms that, while imperfect, represented advancement. The viral footage remained a symbol, circulated and recirculated, a reminder that unified action could shift authority, that institutions could be compelled to transform when people refused to surrender. Carline returned to her lab following the conference, organizing lessons for the fall semester, her hands steady as she arranged beakers and pipettes. The underdog had prevailed. The overlooked had been validated. But more than that, she'd transformed her trauma into a platform for transformation, guaranteeing that what happened to her wouldn't happen to others. The resolution wasn't merely personal. It was systemic. It was lasting. It was justice as technique, truth as persistence, power reclaimed through the slow, purposeful labor of holding systems answerable. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would value it, and let's continue building this community together. And before you leave, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what resonated with you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next one.